Hi and welcome to The Nation. I'm Gerald Ratnam, and I'm sure you already know this, but just in case, a middle manager is someone who works in the middle levels of a company or a company's organizational hierarchy. Now, they are positioned between the top executives, such as CEOs, and the frontline employees. Middle managers are responsible for implementing the strategies and decisions made by upper management, while also overseeing the work of the employees below them. Their role often involves coordinating and communicating between different levels of the organization to ensure that goals are met and operations run smoothly. We're familiar with the potential of middle managers, but have you considered the challenges they often encounter in their roles? Now, joining me to discuss this is Maresa Ng. She's no stranger to Bernama Radio, Bernama TV. She's been here for many years, helping us with understand these things, and it's been a long time. Welcome back. How long has it been? 2 years?
Wow, I think it's maybe 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years, but welcome back, and thank you very much for picking this amazing topic that we're going to be discussing today, talking about the role of middle managers. Now, when you told me about this problem we have in Malaysia, I started doing some reading, and I found out that, hey, I'm caught in there somewhere too. But that being said, how big a problem is this for Malaysia or in the region?
I think it was not so obvious before. And when I say before, we're talking about before the pandemic. And what COVID did for us was to really show us how fragile some businesses can be. And I think post-COVID, we've started to realize actually the problem is becoming bigger. And what we're seeing is how companies and businesses need to respond even faster to the landscape, to the environment, to customer demands and requirement. But we're finding that there's still that lack of speed, whether it's a small company or a larger corporate. So that's what we're finding. So there is a bigger challenge looming, but not many people are realizing it yet.
Right. So when we look at this whole problem, let's just, before we get to the problem, talk about the work of middle managers and how these people or this demographic contributes to growth, connections, and essentially mentorship in organizations.
That, Jared, is a much needed position from managers. But let me talk about how managers are perceived today and the roles that they take. And most of the time in companies, and I'll differentiate between SMEs as well as larger corporate, but how managers get into the position is that they've been in an executive position, frontliner, for long enough. So, hey, it's time for me to promote you because you've been here a long time. So time for you to be a manager. Oh, okay. So managers are positions where you've been in an execution line for long enough. So it's time for you to be a manager, but many don't realize how to manage, how to work with people, because a lot of them came from an executive role. So if I may, the shift is not just how the top management needs to work with the managers, it's also the managers, Gerald, realizing how they need to perform their role differently. And I think we can talk a little bit more about that in the coming changes of the environment.
Right. Now, we just need to blame somebody for this to get into the next question. So let's talk about senior leaders for a while now. What misunderstandings do senior leaders often have about middle managers, and how would this affect their effectiveness, so to speak?
Okay. Senior leaders, we can put the blame on them because it will start from the top, right? And but it's also, even if the senior leaders, and today a lot of senior leadership teams are changing their approach. But if I may, some senior leaders tend to think that, okay, maybe this information is not necessary for my managers. So sometimes transparency, the transparency of information. And sometimes they take a more top-down approach, where these are the initiatives, this is what we want to focus on, go and do. So sometimes there is a lack of openness and understanding from the senior leaders with how much they can consult their middle managers on what's happening on the ground. Especially when the company is bigger and the hierarchies are more, this becomes more apparent And senior leaders need to listen to what middle managers have to say about what's happening on the ground. And that is something that middle managers have a wealth of information. And that's also another thing, is whether the middle managers know how to present that information, how to analyze that information and say, this is the innovation that we need. This is what the data is telling us. But there's that gap. And so the misinterpretation is that maybe the middle managers are not capable enough. But that is actually what middle managers should be doing. So the misconception, Gerald, is coming from both ends. But while these two don't listen, the gap becomes even bigger.
Mm-hmm. Now, having said what you've said, if we take a look at what's happening in the civil service, and my experiences are a lot with what happens in the civil service. Now, reporting upwards is sometimes, so you talked about withholding information sometimes, and some middle managers hold back information from their bosses, and there's no transparency. Would you then look at it in a view where a middle manager holds information back because he doesn't want to upset the people above him, and they have to, answer to higher ups? In our case, it's usually back to a minister. So there's a lack of information going to the minister then for him to be able to make the right decisions as to what's happening within the civil service or the public sector.
Okay. I'll hold my comment a little bit on civil service, but if it operates like a typical organizational structure, then yes. And you talk about the flow of information. There are a lot of decisions that at a strategic level are made that sometimes middle managers can't really know. So I'm not talking about 100% transparency, but I'm also talking about how middle managers need to also understand why those changes need to be made. And it's cascaded down toward the frontliners. One thing that is crucial is the painful things that we hear about, management want to make these changes. What to do? These are the middle managers. What to do? Like that, lor. So when we hear that, it sounds like the middle manager either doesn't understand, not willing to communicate, or get behind the initiative and the intention and the objective to be communicated across to the team. So then there's a little bit of that pushback. Why we have to do things like this? It's making us work longer. I got more reports to fill in. I got more things to do.
Yeah, so that's why I always try to find that balance between the public sector and the private sector, simply because with middle managers sometimes change, not many people like change. Some people like, let's let the status quo remain, and just so I have this much of work to do and I don't have to do anything above this. Now with change, there is a work process and a flow that needs to change, and that means added work. Now, would this be one of the bigger problems with middle management in Malaysia? Some people call it mediocrity within the corporate world. Do you think that's set in post-COVID?
If you ask me, the whole organization now at all the layers are realizing they are sitting ducks. If COVID could happen to us, it's made everyone wake up. But people are setting back into some kind of status quo. But you're absolutely right. All levels of the organization know that change is inevitable. I'll give you one example: digitalization. COVID just showed every one of us, wow, if we don't digitalize, we'll be like that at home. We can't approve, we can't process claims, we can't make orders, we can't read anything about our business. And digitalization allows the data to come out to us. And that is a very important part of making decisions. And you see, when we digitalize and we get data, middle managers may or may not have access to that data or have the competency to read that data. And how some companies, and I'll give you an example to a simple manufacturing company, a true blue SME, does corrugated plastics. He actually digitalized his entire shop floor, his production facility, so much so that it times how materials are delivered and produced in a certain period of time. Now get this, this is the amazing part. This information is not only for the directors, which happen to be brothers and sisters, family business, right? But he says, I chose to get my middle managers involved to see the data of the company. And gone are those days where, oh, only the family members get to see. So sometimes there's that bureaucracy, and McKinsey wrote a lot of studies on this bureaucracy that gets in the way of innovation. But middle managers now are expected to understand the data and make proposals because they understand what is going on at the bottom, what's happening, reading the data. This is my proposal. And that information, so if you talk about digitalization, that change, that much needed change, many companies knew we needed to go digital. But maybe at the top, they realize, hey, if we don't go digital, we will be sitting ducks again. But there is a pushback. There's a pushback from the middle managers to the bottom because when you go digital, you need to change the way you operate, even change right down to how customers pay. How do we read our data? So that kind of change, there is a lot of pushback if they don't understand. But leadership teams need to include middle managers in the decision making. That helps the change to be a lot smoother because there was inclusion.
Right. So if you look at this whole structure, middle management, the people above them and the people beneath them, the middle managers will probably know a lot more as to what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, the ecosystem, the state of play, because they get messages from up high, or as we call it, wahyu, and and from downstairs, they hear murmurs from downstairs about what's happening, so on and so forth. So sometimes, do you think there's an overload of information with them and the lack of the skill to process this information and send it upwards or downwards?
There's a high chance. There's a lot of information because the middle managers are in a very unique position. They are managing both upwards and downwards. Right. So you just imagine the kind of information. If you're a top leader, information goes down.
Right.
If you're at the bottom, information comes to me. But if I'm the middle manager, wow. So the managing of stakeholders, the information, yes, it can be very overwhelming, but that's where the prioritization and this direction and prioritization needs to be set very clearly. What is expected of me as a middle manager? And this
hold that thought. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to work through, we've already worked through some of the pain points, but saying if you have middle managers under you or if you are a middle manager, what do you do? We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Maresa will give us some tips as to how we can work with this if we do have problems, what we need to recognize, and how do we move forward. We'll come back with that shortly right here on The Nation. Stay with us.
Ketahui tips keselamatan elektrik di musim banjir. Sebelum menghadapi banjir, tutup suis kelengkapan elektrik dan diikuti suis utama. Pindahkan kelengkapan elektrik ke tempat yang tinggi. Semasa menghadapi banjir, jangan petik suis, sentuh kelengkapan atau kabel elektrik dengan tangan basah. Jangan pegang struktur, tiang atau pagar besi. Jangan hampiri, berenang atau meredah air banjir berdekatan pepasangan elektrik. Jangan alih, baiki, uji talian atas elektrik yang putus atau jatuh ke tanah. Selepas banjir, tutup suis utama sebelum kerja-kerja pembersihan dilakukan. Pastikan kelengkapan elektrik kering sebelum digunakan. Dan lantik kontraktor elektrik berdaftar dengan Suruhanjaya Tenaga.
Thank you for staying with us right here on The Nation with me, Gerald Ratnam. I've got Maresa Ng in the studios with us. She's quite the subject matter go-to when it comes to learning everything about SMEs, business, and being a good boss. Now, having said what you've said about middle managers, let's take a look at what people in the upper echelons have to know with regards to their middle managers, and how can we if we already have a dilemma with the whole middle management conundrum in Malaysia, what can we do to make it better? So where do we start with moving forward with regards to middle managers, where we are at this point? I'm talking about Malaysia, us as in Malaysia. Yeah.
I think the efforts, Gerard, is twofold, and it must happen at two layers. The leadership teams, top management, as well as the middle managers themselves. So even if the leadership teams start to change their approach, and I'll talk about this approach. The approach of the leadership teams is to take a more consultative approach versus a more instructional telling approach. Okay, this is where we're going to go, this is what you got to do. Tum, 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 tum. And that kills innovation.
But doesn't that tell you something? If you, I mean, by using a bit of critical thinking, that will tell you that if you take an instructional approach as opposed to a constructive approach, instructional means I just want the work to be done, and I'm not interested as to how that work is done. Isn't that telling of that? Yes, no?
No, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you say a more constructive consultation, we call that a coaching approach. That means to use a series of more facilitating the responses, facilitating the thinking process, as opposed with instruction. That's very traditional. And that's also why some of the younger generations have a problem with that. Oh, and okay, if you're going to just tell me what to do, I'll just do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you look at leadership teams, how much will they know about what goes on? And that's where that consultative approach needs to be had with the higher level. And if you're asking me that first change, but middle managers, as their leadership teams consult them, they have to be ready with the thought process as well. They have to be ready with the strategic mindset. Okay, I understand we're going to make this change. This is my proposition. That risk taking. And there are some middle managers that they're not ready to take risks, but it's a two-part thing, Gerald. It's a two-part thing because sometimes they're not ready to take risk because of perhaps a previous problem where they came out, they shared some ideas, and oh no, I think that doesn't work. Tried that before. That sounds silly, and that makes the middle manager also go back into their shell. So that's why I say it's a two-part thing. But if it were to start, it would start with the leadership team and how they behave around this bunch.
But have you considered, let me flip this conversation a little bit. Have you considered the possibility that when a middle manager sticks in a position for a very long time, he or she might have so much of knowledge that when they're being told what to do from upper management, they're like, no, how are you guys even coming up with this? Now, a lot of us become bosses without knowing how to be bosses. Wouldn't that be a problem too?
Big time.
Big time.
You're nailing it. And that's why even bosses, we tell the difference between a leader and a boss. A boss is barking orders.
Right.
And a leader would be somebody that takes a more coaching approach where it's on the premise, Gerald, that the manager is in that position because they actually have the resources to perform the job.
Right.
That's the first premise.
Right.
Our job is to access it.
Before I let you take it home, just the thought that's come to my head. Our approximation, so when I first became a newscaster or radio announcer, I asked the radio announcer, how do you do it? He said, act like a radio announcer until you fake it till you get it.
Yeah.
So a lot of our approximation of being bosses was from watching TV beat dramas and drama minggu ini, bawa blue file biar aku sign. So do you think that's a problem at every level? The fact that some of us just don't know how to be at that level. There's no proper training to take you to that level. It's something you learn. You Forrest Gump your way through it.
I like the way you explain that. You're totally spot on because that's how we used to learn. And I'll use we because that's maybe the older generation, right? Where we watch our boss.
Yeah, but
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Me too. Oops. We see our boss and then we do. We have to observe, but gone are the days where people know what they're looking at. They do need to be a good newscaster. Almost that leader, that person who is trying to mentor, needs to break down the skills. Break down the skills. To be a good newscaster, this is the first skill, this is the first skill, and this is what a lot of leaders don't know how to do. They become good at it. And the thing that I always hear and that pains me is, if I can do it, why you cannot do? Another one. Isn't all this common sense? It's not common. That's why we have to break it down. And that's how we raise up the middle managers by saying, okay, start with this skill, start with this skill. And when they can understand that and they can see that being modeled, Gerald, being modeled is one part. That shows that we are congruent. But being modeled is only one part. You model it and you communicate what you're doing. Because the observation skill is very different from back then to now. That's why we can just see our boss do, and then we start doing. But that's very different for the way the generations are learning. They almost need to see, break it down, compartmentalize it, and teach them step by step. And they will be able to rise up.
Right. We can go on talking about this, but I guess we're coming to a close. We've got about 4 minutes left. I'll let you take this home. What do we need to remember about this? Well, I think if there's a message for middle management and a message for people above middle management, what would your messages be? Those two important messages for these two important demographics in the workforce.
Most important message, Gerald, is to take a consultative approach with each other. The inclusivity, to communicate the direction, to help people understand, as opposed with give an order, because that curbs creativity, innovation, accountability, ownership. Take a consultative approach, which means a coaching approach. The skill of, and if I can break down the coaching skill, just even the art of listening. That is a consultative approach. To hear first, what are you guys experiencing on the ground? Tell us, what is the data showing you? What are you seeing? Take that and provide that space and that room for middle managers to shine, because you're right, they have all the resources and the knowledge. But at a leadership level, are we listening? That's for the top. The bottom, if you are given the space as a middle manager, do your research, understand your work, propose the solutions, speak up, manage the conflict, lean in instead of lean out. I don't know how to do this. Don't lean out, lean in and contribute. This is at this level for the middle managers. Gone are your misconception that I just do what my boss tell me. No, go beyond, because you understand the layer below on the ground better than actually leadership teams do. So this is my message for these two to be able to work well together.
I guess for the people above, you know, I mean the bosses, I think one of their problems would be that middle managers just do the allotted jobs, and they don't go out of their comfort zones to explore other territories, and that's very telling when they say, hey, you know, I can't give you that promotion simply because, you know, you're not growing. Can that be blamed back to the middle manager then?
Yeah, well,
you're not taking the initiative, so to speak.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. If they don't take the initiative, they shouldn't be in that position in the first place. So I would say that the expectations for a manager is very different and increasing. And their role is important. That's why we're having this segment. But if they are not ready, I don't want to change, I'm pulling back, I don't want to do more, then that's a telltale sign that they are probably not ready to lead.
So this is a very simplistic view, and we've got about a minute left. Let's try to break this down a little bit more. When I hear you talk about bosses, you know, moving in and being a more responsive, being more inclusive, doesn't that hearken to the days of servant leadership?
Oh, absolutely. I think, okay, I won't profess to know what servant leadership, the whole 9 yards is, but servant leadership is
or at least
what
the
Simon
basics
Sinek.
of it. No,
Yeah, you know, this is what Simon Sinek is. We are not here to take charge. We are here to serve the people in our charge. That's what Simon Sinek says. So we're not in charge. We're not in the front. We're here to support all these people to charge.
Right. I think that's a good way to end it. What's that quote again? Just so we all keep etch that in our minds. What did Simon Sinek say?
If I recall this correctly, Simon Sinek said, leaders are not the people in charge. We are here to care for the people in our charge.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Maresa. Always a pleasure having you here. Please come back again, and thank you for staying with us right here on Bernama TV. We've got news updates coming up all day. I'm Gerald Ratnam signing off. Have a great day ahead and stay safe. Bye-bye.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.